And we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Freedom Anarchist News Review. Tonight's big topic, of course, being the Palestine action prescription, which is possibly due to start happening on Monday, which Andy will hopefully be able to talk us through some of the legal shenanigans around that. I'm joined, incidentally, by Andy and Tabitha. Thank you very much for joining us. This will be followed by a bit of chat on Israel's latest outrages, the Iran-US thing, all of which has happened in the week since our last broadcast. It's quite a newsy kind of week in that sense. There is the Labour rebellion on welfare cuts, which Keir Starmer has just announced he is planning to try and bull through with no concessions. There is a frankly amazing story of Nigel Farage planning to let in non-DOMs by having them just buy off their tax responsibilities. There is the assisted dying bill and comment on that. Obviously, we had quite a lengthy and very decent analysis piece on the website this week. And the UK is buying a new fleet of nuclear bombers as part of its commitment to the newly agreed 5% NATO payment schedule and presumably its commitment to decommissioning. So to start off with the Palestine action story, Andy, do you want to clue us in on what's happening with it?
Well, various organisations can be prescribed, banned under the Terrorism Act 2000. There's about 82 international and a couple of domestic groups, National Action, for example, that are banned. There's another little list, about 25 in the North of Ireland. And what this means is it is illegal to become a member or be a member of the group, to express support for it, or very widely to display any item or wear a piece of clothing that is likely to give reasonable suspicion that you are showing support to it. So 3 offences in sections 11 through 13 of the Act, and crucially, it allows the government to seize any assets and freeze bank accounts of those organisations and their members or suspected members, all of which is most of which is in the Anti-Terrorism Crime and Security Act of 2001 that they brought in after the Terrorism Act 2000 hadn't been clearer that it was against terrorism instead of for it, so they had an anti-terrorism one. And there's also the Terrorism Assets Freezing, etc. Act of 2010, which is just getting silly. In consequence of how it will be enforced, we suspect it is very unlikely they will be prosecuting people for the 2 serious offences of membership or expressing support, because you get a jury trial. And at the moment, that's not going to go down very well, we think. However, they are very scary because they have a maximum of 14 years imprisonment. So people are naturally panicking a lot about that. And what is quite likely is that the police will arrest people and stick them on bail forever and use the opportunity to seize all their stuff, go through their computer records and generally harass. The Section 13 offence is more common. We've had it in the past with people supporting Kurdish causes, always accused of being part of the PKK, which are only prescribed because we are in cahoots with the rather nasty Turkish government. And what has happened with those cases, and with a few people wearing sort of Palestine flags and the famous paraglider jacket patches, is that people have been given a conditional discharge by the magistrates, or rather a district judge, and told to go away. No one has gone down for that. But again, it enables the police to show a low level of harassment for anyone who goes around saying, I support Palestine action. If you say, I just support Palestine, there should be action about Palestine, obviously that would not qualify. So they've managed to choose a group For anyone wondering if there's a loophole, if a group changes its name or has an alias, they're still prescribed without any further measures. So Action Palestine, we're secretly not the same. Nod and a wink, you can be done for just the same. Now, challenges to it. It is done simply by the Home Secretary making an announcement. There has to be an announcement in the House of Lords. It's by what's called a statutory instrument. It has to be laid before Parliament. And then it comes into force at what time they say. So it could be enforced as early as Tuesday, or they might give it a delay. They've got no real reason to say that it's urgent because they announced it last week and didn't do it immediately. And again, making it a bit of a farce. Normally, these things are in force the next day, as the terrorists might bury the Semtex or take the first plane to Cuba before they're rounded up. So once again, it all looks a bit ridiculous. On fighting it beyond that, there are a number of ways. First of all, and these have to be consecutive, Parliament can reject it by a motion of either house, a majority of either house, technically to petition the king not to allow it. That ain't going to happen. The usual suspects in the Commons, I think you can probably name all the MPs who are going to speak against it. There might be a few more voices in the House of Lords, particularly from the old fogey law lords who actually remembered we used to have a reputation for being lenient towards peaceful protesters. The famous speech of Lord Hoffman in the case of Jones Margaret back from 2003 springs to mind, where they say that the magistrates will always treat peaceful protesters more leniently than ordinary criminals, which I'd let you read if only you can be bothered to get as far as the list of barristers who appeared for the protesters in that, featuring one Keir Starmer, before he changed his tune and decided that now they're all terrorists. Starmer also represented some people who broke into Fairford Air Force Base during the Gulf War, the Iraq War in 2003. But yeah, just to mention my favourite hypocrite while we're on track. Then what you have to do is you ask the Home Secretary to change their mind. When they don't, there is an organisation called the Proscribed Organisations Appeals Commission, whose makeup I can't work out, except it consists of a senior judge and some other toadies. And there is a very complicated process of asking them to investigate whether the group should have been banned on Wednesbury reasonable principles, i.e., as in a judicial review. So the Home Secretary's not just got to be wrong; they've got to be totally out of order. And in that process, the Home Secretary doesn't even have to show the claimant, which means either someone in the organisation or someone affected by it, the evidence that they've got, because it might be secret. And so they appoint a special lawyer to act for you, to look at all the secret documents that you're not allowed to see, and your lawyers that you've appointed aren't allowed to see. So that's all a bit ridiculous. And finally, you can appeal to the Court of Appeal.
Yeah.
Just to finish the saga, there is something called Netpol Lawyers Group, made up of all the prominent people currently in protest, law, barristers, solicitors, etc. They are having a meeting tomorrow night to discuss in depth strategy and how to challenge it, and hopefully we'll be able to let people know what the plan is. But at the moment, It appears that it will be led largely by Kelly's solicitors, who have been doing a lot of the Palestine Action cases, and fronted by good old Gareth Pearce, who the older viewers may remember from the terrible film or the very good case that you had on the Guildford Hall. And Birmingham 6. Um, so yeah, that's the legal summary as I see it, unless I've left any real gaping things out.
So are they fundraising towards any legal costs or anything like that?
There is a massive crowdfunder that, when I last looked a couple of hours ago, had 107,000.
Good
So
start.
that's fine. No one needs to give any more. Over 3,000 people have contributed. So I praise those people. On the other hand, they have now given a big job to LASIT, the left and single issue terrorism branch of MI5, and GCHQ, a big task in tracing all of them through their emails so that they can go on the database of known terrorists. Um, so yeah, anyone thinking of saying things, the chances of you being prosecuted if you say I'm a supporter of Pal Action is extremely low, given half the country probably supports them. The chances of you being constantly flagged up in the future as some sort of troublemaker is, of course, high. But that is something that we've all got
Yeah, not
live
something
with.
that any of us need to worry about, I imagine.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, I mean, thanks ever so, Andy. That's fascinating. It's really good to hear that the old guard of the lawyers are steaming forward again. Good luck to them. But just to take that sort of projection of the future further, I mean, it's obviously, if this goes ahead, is going to provide a massive, massive gun for anybody interviewing any vaguely decent MP on the subject, isn't it? It was, do you support Hamas? Do you support Hamas? And now it's going to be, do you support Pal Action? Do you support Pal Action? You know? And it's going to be a way of absolutely chopping the movement off, not at the grassroots, which is interesting, although it will absolutely, you're right, cause fear and worry among people who support PSC at the moment and who even those who do support Pal Action. But it's also going to absolutely provide a silver bullet, as they see it, for anybody in the public eye who is talking about Gaza, who's talking about Palestine, and and that to me makes it actually less of the stupid reactive knee-jerk decision that it looks like, and more of we've been keeping this up our sleeves, really. You can see Zach Polanski rising up, real threat both to the Green Party establishment as well as to the broader establishment. He's been very vocal in Pal Action. This goes through on Tuesday. He gets cornered. What's he going to do? So I hope they're all thinking of sensible things to say to counteract these questions, because they will be getting them and they will be repeated. Yeah.
There's been a
What do you think, Simon? Is that?
there's been a very notable uptick in the last actually in the last 24 hours, couple of days, from particularly the right-wing press, in which they have been hammering any angle they can find, very, very similar to the campaign against Corbyn,
Mhm.
um, where they're saying, like an article I picked up, this was in the Times a couple of days ago, which has been gone around the whole of the right-wing press, in which the government is investigating whether Palestine
Oh
Action is
yeah.
in some way funded by Iran. And there is no evidence of it. It is literally just a suggestion that has been made in the Times because Palestine Action is Palestine Action and it gets grassroots money. So this is then worked up into, oh, maybe they're funded by Iran, as though
Mhm.
Iran would need to throw money at Palestine Action. And then they throw onto it, there's one guy, Paul Short, who perhaps foolishly did a little bit on TikTok or social media holding a toy gun saying resistance, free, resistance and freedom and all this kind of stuff. And it's, I mean, he's holding a toy gun, for crying out loud. It's not the world's most threatening thing.
Well, it's
But
not threatening at all.
again,
It's a complete lie, isn't it? And you can
yeah,
see that those war drums in the
it's a
background.
guy going a bit
Yeah.
OTT on his rhetoric. Class war said twice as bad a bunch of things back in the day, right? But again, it's kind
Well,
of
it's a free
added to
country.
this.
We've
Oh
got
well,
free speech.
Palestine action is full of supporters of terrorism, right? That's the basic pitch that's going on.
Hmm.
And and it's that dovetails with prescribing Palestine action, which then itself is then used to, as you say, go after people who are less on the is that thing of pulling away the extreme element from the broader elements and saying to the broader element, if you say anything which is similar to the extreme element, then you're kind of the same thing as the extreme element.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, it's that bit with Krishna Guru Murthy talking to Corbyn and saying, "But you said you were friends with Hamas, with Hezbollah, didn't you?" It's like, I mean, he's being diplomatic. But yeah, that kind of childish um, degrees of separation thing is quite an obvious next step that they're planning after Palestine action gets prescribed.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And deeply sinister. And if you look at the bots, which one wouldn't advise anyone to do, but it's quite interesting how they're programmed and what they're being programmed to say. It is absolutely all pal action of the enemy within. You know, this is going hand in hand with the preparations for turning us into a militarized zone ready for an attack on our soil at any point.
yeah.
So, I mean, absurd and ridiculous and disgraceful though this is, in the most fundamental level, it's also, I think, the product of a very sinister and coordinated attempt to like turn us into 1930s Germany, basically. So, yeah. What do you think, Andy? Is that how you see it, or is
Well,
that an over exaggerated response to a load of noise?
it it is quite a big step down the line. Now, you could
Mm,
argue that the whole concept of having prescribed groups is you're prosecuting people for what they believe rather than what they've done, which is never good. There are some groups that have my favourite being the International Sikh Youth Federation. They were prescribed for many years simply because the Indian government were just prejudiced against Sikhs. They weren't much more than a Boy Scout organisation for the Sikhs. And eventually they got deprescribed. So a lot of the groups on there are because various dodgy countries that we support um, have put pressure on the British government to outlaw them. But
mm,
normally it's been relatively small groups without any public support. This is a really big test.
mm,
When we know from opinion polls that the majority of the British population now support recognizing a Palestinian state,
mhm,
support or rather are against the Israeli invasion of Gaza and the genocide they're committing there. And when you start as a government going down prosecuting people for being your political opponents or disagreeing with the country's foreign policy, you're in a very different situation
mm.
from
Yeah.
trying to attack people who are genuine terrorists who are going to blow things up. And if I've got a big criticism of Palestine Action, it's they're basically a peace organisation. They aren't. The Quakers could have been banned on the same basis for what they've done over the years. They've
Mm.
smashed up more aircraft and done more to military bases than Pal Action have.
I mean,
Yeah.
this so
Yeah, let's go after the Quakers.
I mean, I think there's a very good reason why the government hasn't gone after the Quakers, and it's the Quakers are considerably better organized and bigger
Mm,
grouping than Palestine Action. I mean, Palestine Action has a lot of support, but it's, in and of itself, it's a small direct action group.
Mm.
Um, so it's easy to target. I wouldn't be surprised if the government bottles it a little bit, because I think that they may well have underestimated the level of reaction that this provokes. Because, you know, ultimately the left as a whole, and I think probably a good chunk of the general public, although a distressingly large percentage, is quite relaxed about losing considerable chunks of their
Mhm.
freedoms as citizens. Um, but yeah, I mean, the ability to ban a group for non-violent direct action amounting to essentially petty vandalism is it's kind of pulling the curtains for quite a lot of what the left does essentially
Yeah.
year on year. Um, like is the fact that it's coming from Labour, I think also gives a little extra frisson of betrayal. Not that we
No,
expected
I was
anything
like, have you
much
not got over
better.
that? Yeah.
But there's still large sections of I think less in the south, but certainly more in the north, maybe, where people are still kind of connected to Labour as uh, in a kind of more visceral way, I suppose.
Hmm.
They still think of Labour as their party, and it's
Hmm.
Labour that's doing this, not the Tories, not Reform. And as Andy points out, Keir Starmer, a guy who within a generation was defending this sort of stuff in court, and is now standing on the other side of the line, banning it. Absolutely astonishing
I mean, one would
fall from
almost think
grace in
he
terms of his
did that
commitment to
only
human
for his
rights.
career and without any principled sentiment whatsoever, wouldn't one? But there we are. Yeah,
Almost as though you
I
can't trust
think
career politicians.
But yeah, but he was a career human rights lawyer. Do these exist? I think you're right about the Northern Labour, but I think that sort of overlooks the fact that the millions who voted for Corbyn also have that emotional, across the country, also have that emotional investment because they were briefly given at least a manifesto which reflected their concerns and which reflected people's daily concerns that was vaguely anti-hierarchical because it had consulted with disabled groups, it had consulted with people on the ground, to formulate policies. And now we have this absolute antithetical, hierarchical, authoritarian. And I think that's hurting a lot of people, not just traditional kind of Labour voters in the North. And it's certainly hurting young people because obviously there was a massive surge towards those policies from young people. And now, yeah. Although those polls that show Labour defectors would go and vote Green and Lib Dem rather than Reform, bless them. And the polls that show young people would vote for Green and for a new Corbyn party. I mean, these are the real people on the ground. They're not toxic reform anti-Palestine constituency. As you say, they're by pulling in pal action, they're going against the very heart of the community, really. So yeah.
Um, yes. Do we have anything else to say about Palestine action related stuff? Oh, there is a quick one to note. Um, So a film that was due to be brought out next month, but which, if Palestine Action is prescribed, will essentially be banned, is To Kill a War Machine, which is essentially the story of Palestine Action. The director of To Kill a War Machine has just dropped a link, so you can now buy tickets or download the film. Um, you will only have a few days potentially to watch that, or indeed screen it. Um, so if you wish to do that, then do it soon. I would say. Um,
Mm.
which is a kind of secondary thing, right? I mean, again, as Andy was kind of hinting at, was a potential impact of the ban will be to uh, make people rather less confident in talking about direct action in Palestine solidarity causes.
Mm.
Um, because at what point does the state decide this looks a little bit officially like it's like a Palestine action, and therefore uh, we will define it as such and use the state's powers on it.
I would say that there is almost no likelihood of them getting convictions for people watching the film or showing the film unless you otherwise express support for power action. You can show it as information and say this is what these people say, and we're not saying we're for or against it. But if you're too scared to show the film, show some fluffy, uncontroversial film that's perfectly legal, like Triumph for the Will springs to mind, or yeah, it just shows you where we are. That people showing a film about peaceful protesters are worried about the legality, and you can show actual Nazi propaganda perfectly legally.
Mm.
Yeah, very
Yep.
good point. All right, on which chirpy note, move on to the next story. So, Labour, there is a potential rebellion on welfare cuts. The current news on it appears to be that Keir Starmer is dismissing them as essentially just noise and has said that the party remains pretty united. Yeah, it's an interesting one. It does certainly the fact that 120 MPs have signed this amendment, which would essentially kill the cuts to welfare, suggests that at least a chunk of the party is not as confident as Keir Starmer is about the outcome of this kind of these kinds of cuts. What I mean, obviously there is the impact on a vote in 4 years' time in which Labour gets less votes and Reform gets more seats. I suppose the more interesting question from our perspective is back on direct action again, which is um, do the MPs as canaries in the mine represent a possibility or a probability that direct action is going to make a reappearance? Obviously, we have DPAC and groups like that.
Mm.
Start with you, Andy.
Oh dear. The obvious thing from the MPs is that they are starting to work out that party loyalty isn't very useful if your party is going to be kicked out of office. People looking who are backbenchers now, looking hopefully to be parliamentary secretaries or junior ministers in the next parliament, won't be in the House of Commons in the next parliament at this rate. So their loyalty is now on a very low edge, and that may lead not only to more rebellions, but the possibility of a split off party as they jump ship before the crash. If the measures, as we expect, still go through, what can be done in terms of direct action on benefit cuts? Because it is always harder to fight cuts than it is to fight direct impositions. The classic example being that the poll tax was very easy to fight in that sense, because if people didn't pay it, then the government was in a fix. If they're not paying you, then it's much harder, short of going with a shooter and robbing them, to get your money back. So I'm hopeful that we will see a rise in direct action. Not of that level of violence, he hastened to add. That was merely a comical aside for any legal eagles listening. But yeah, I think that there will be an upsurge of protests, certainly, and I think that hopefully it will get some people in this Labour government to realise, as we have discussed on this show many times, that constantly appealing to the people who will never vote for you on the right is not going to help when you could be winning over the people on the left, who actually might turn out and support you, and possibly be in line with your socialist principles as well.
I'm less optimistic than you on the socialist principles, but Tabitha,
I
how
would
do you,
say they found a socialist principle. What was it doing? Lurking lurking behind the speaker's chair, squeaking slightly. Yeah, again, Andy puts it very well because basically, once you've been absolutely shafted and your money's been taken off you, how are you going to go and protest? It will be down to the rest of us to take up that baton in many, many cases, I think. My neighbor can't go out there and protest because she can't leave the house. So, but again, as Andy says, how will that move the dial? How will that get any sense of reparation or justice or decency back into this equation if this goes through? It will not. The people will be living with this. And while I agree that, you want direct action, which will change this. If this gets voted through, it won't change it. They'll have to live with it for 4 years at least, and never mind the poor MPs looking to be out of a job. So um, yeah, I think there's some fantastic campaigning groups. I don't know. I think right now I think all MPs should lock on in the chamber. I think that's the only thing that they can do. I appreciate their furious emails and their carefully crafted social media messages, but I question why they are not taking direct action, why they are not shutting this excuse me, shutting this place down. Because on everything from Gaza to this is not business as usual. This is no way business as usual. This is austerity on austerity, murder upon murder, and yeah. So that would be my advice to the decent MPs.
I think one additional, which is possibly worth flagging, is so obviously this is symptomatic and a part of the rolling process of the state withdrawing from many aspects of life, right? So
Mm.
we obviously we've had the various privatizations, we've had the uh, international aid has been getting reduced. We've got kind of money being slowly withdrawn in the form of frozen wages and all the rest of it from things like the NHS, the handing off of education, etc., etc. One of the things that the withdrawal of the state does, obviously, is I hesitate to say an opportunity because it's in many ways, what it is first and foremost is a tragedy and a thing which will cause misery to millions. But also, one of the things which obviously happened to the left in general, um, way back in the historic times, was that it used to run its own mutual aid processes. We had our own libraries, we had our own health, sort of mini health services and kind of insurance services and all the rest of it, right? And those all kind of disappeared when the state said, we're going to run this. Um, and, you can sort of look at the cooperative movement as an element of that as well, I suppose, is that we had the concept of social mutual aid, particularly on a community level, was slowly alienated away from us, and in some cases,
Mm.
specifically taken away, physically taken away from us. The withdrawal of the state or the disinterest of the state does present a question mark, which anarchists do have something of an answer to, which is okay. So in the absence of the state, now what? And
Yeah,
the answer
right.
is obviously us,
Yeah.
right?
Mm. Hmm. I mean, as I was saying, where I live, there are enough fit, retired, fairly not badly off, very well motivated people to keep something like that running. But I mean, they've even screwed school children into the ground with hours and overtime and exhaustion and lack of food. I don't expect it was easier in Nye Bevan's day. in the coalfields anyway at all. But as well as what you were saying, Simon, this sort of mental barrier, there are
Absolutely.
also massive physical barriers to this, which is presumably why Bevan and everybody else went, okay, let's get the state to do this. This is just exhausting. We can't expect communities to do this with regularity because people are on their knees. But is that wrong, do you think? Do you think there's still the capacity
I,
in
I
society to do that?
so there's a little bit which Donald Room, who was an old freedom presser, used to do the Wildcat column. Uh, he used to talk about a habit of service was how he used to
Oh,
term it. And it was something which he described as being much more, not just an anarchist thing, much more universalized concept
mm,
um, that was quite widespread across particularly working class communities where people, they would go to their lengthy, difficult jobs and then they would come home and there'd be the kids and all the rest of it. But then they would also go out. And some of it was connected to things like the church, for example, because obviously the church would
mm,
ask for or demand people's time and attention and money and et cetera, et cetera. But there was more of a kind of a habitual understanding that you weren't just, I mean, now we have a great deal of, entertainment available and an understanding that when you are home and you've put the kids to bed, you get to have
mm,
a glass of wine and a sit down.
mm.
And I think that was less of a, obviously we didn't have the tellies in the same way back when Donald Room was young. Um, but there is, I think, a sense. So this is why I mentioned the alienation bill, I suppose, is that I
Mm,
think, I mean, I agree with you that absolutely we have there are the physical problems and uh, the problems in terms of resources and all the rest of it, all of which is can come across as insurmountable in part because those structures have collapsed, right?
mm,
Like those structures take a long time, a lot of effort to build up. And once they're gone, they're very difficult to bring back.
mm,
Um, and we don't have the church. I am not a religious man, and I think that the
mm,
church has many, many downsides. One of the things that it did provide was a tertiary source of resources that
mhm,
communities did use to help bumble along, etc., etc.
mhm.
And that the absence of that is the absence of a social buffer that I don't think, charity doesn't replace it. It's not the same thing. Solidarity, not charity, etc., etc. Right. Um, but yeah, so you do have structural elements which conspire against the rejuvenation and rebuilding of these structures in everyday life. And you also have the psychological element that we are not used to it. We're not used to the idea that
No.
you finish work and then you finish, and then you put the kids to bed, and then you go out to your political meeting and do all the other bits and pieces as
Mm,
well on top of that. Like it's a heavy duty load that even in the heyday of the left was a minority pursuit, right?
mm,
Um,
mm,
so yeah, so it's not. I think your point you make it's very good points um, in terms of the difficulties of building something like that.
mm. Well, I mean, you say structural. I mean, it's like literally, isn't it? Often with the road building
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the fracturing of communities through architectural shenanigans as well. It's pootling round to your neighbours or down the road is also made physically more difficult by that those developments since that time. But yeah, yeah. I'm sorry, I don't want to talk it down because when
No, no, no.
it's
I mean,
yeah, I don't bother helping each other. It's too hard. Yeah, I know.
I mean, I don't think it's worthwhile just doing a hagiographical look at these things. It is very much worth
Well, it's
talking about the
certainly
difficulties as well.
analyzing what the as you say, analyzing the jumps and working out what you need to get over. Yeah, for sure is probably powerful and important. But I mean, do you think this bill will go through?
Andy?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Hmm?
so as well.
yeah. So,
Do you think it will go
I
through?
think it's too early for really big rebellions.
Right.
And I think that too early in the parliament. I don't think enough MPs are panicking yet
Right.
I think when they're actually looking down the barrel of redundancy, then they will start getting desperate.
On
I
on
also
on.
sorry.
There
Sorry.
is a lot of party discipline in there. You cannot even get to the relatively low level of a backbench MP without being drummed into having all your personality kicked out of you and taught to recite the party line and praise the Prime Minister at every opportunity. So
Absolutely.
even the
Sorry,
rebels who are so far are being, oh no, we're not really rebels. We're just a little worried or concerned that's going to take a while, I think. But we might be. This is a first step. And the thing with direct action is that, of course, and any popular movement is that it's encouraged by signs of government weakness. When you see that they're starting to falter, and then people are more keen to get involved because they think there might be success, that you might actually achieve something through it and that gains a momentum. That's what we're looking for.
You don't think that the news that the whips tried to do their usual bullying, bribery, blackmail, and, and said it was a confidence vote to Starmer and the number of MPs signing it went up? You don't think that
That's
might
good
be.
news. That's good news.
Yeah, it was extraordinary, It's just, I mean, I was thinking, reflecting that the possible bright side of this extraordinarily bland intake of Labour potato cakes, aka new intake MPs. I mean, maybe it's really good that they're so incredibly bland that the whips haven't got anything on them, I,
It
so,
might
so
be true.
yeah. So and you can't really so blackmails kind of would be out. Bullying, I mean, I just don't think this Labour are as good at it as they were. And bribery, as you say, if they're not going to be in power in 4 years' time, what are they going to be bribed with? And they know that if this government doesn't turn round, they are going to be out of a job and hated. They won't get another
Mm.
job. It's not just, your 4 years are over, Sunny, off you go to BP. That nobody's going to want to know them. So I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic that
Good, good.
that Labour won't vote with the Tories, of course, because that would never happen. And yeah.
I mean, I would lean probably towards it going through. I don't think that Starmer would make such a song and dance, or maybe he would do it deliberately, but I think it's unlikely that he would go to the media to say, yeah, no, we're specifically going to go through with this, unless he was reasonably confident that he could get at least the majority. I wouldn't be surprised if it was embarrassing. Um,
Hmm.
but whether it would be an actual loss is harder to say.
Hmm.
Um, Kraken. Which leads us on to well, actually skip one. So Israel's latest outages, outrages, and Iran and the US. Um, so I'm not even sure that the Iran had been bombed by the time we did the last news review. And since then, obviously, we have had the bombing of Iran, Iran bombing Israel, the US bombing Iran, Iran sort of pretending that it was bombing the US, but not really. Um, Israel bombing Iran again, the US getting annoyed at Israel, and now we seem to be on a kind of even keel again. Um, Fairly extraordinary series of events. I think it is the first time I've actually seen a US president swear live on camera to the world. Um,
Um, I mean, anecdotally, Lyndon Johnson barely didn't swear during his term in office, but not on live television. Admittedly, there was a lot less of that back in those days. But It's been very hard to keep up from one minute to the other, and I think we probably need a much longer show to get an analysis of who's won uh, uh, the Iran Israel with a touch of America war. But at the moment, with Trump saying that they've completely destroyed the Iranian nuclear program, where they might not have, Iran seems to have got off the hook much more than I thought they would. The sad side of the show is that Gaza has continued completely unabated. I checked the stats on that, and in the 12-day war, the Israelis managed to kill about 870 people compared to 824 in the preceding 12 days before they started the war with Iran. So that has made no effect except for driving Gaza off the news headlines.
Yeah, no, the whole continuing gunning down of people waiting for water is all very grim. Um, and yeah, as you say, has been completely sidelined by all of these bombing shenanigans.
Which was part of the motive, wasn't it? I mean, I read somewhere that this has been concluded at the moment in such a way that basically the US, Iran, and Israel can all claim victory. I mean, to their own to their own populations, but yeah, they Netanyahu backed against a wall, facing prosecution, facing Israeli elections which are coming up, had to do something, and this is what he did. But yeah, taking Gaza off the map, off the radar would have had to be one of them because there were definitely naive though this sounds, sources of discontent weren't there in the Western media and among politicians that hadn't been there before. The naked horror of shooting starving people seemed to galvanize beyond the naked horror of
I
shooting
was genuinely
starving people
surprised.
before. Yeah, but
I did not expect Piers Morgan, of all people, to
uh,
turn into a bulldog against the Israeli genocide, but he
Oh,
seems to have been actively convinced.
mm.
And you know, he's a piece of crap, but fair play. He's once in a while.
Yeah, yeah. Emily Thornberry looked shrunken, which wasn't saying anything different, but she looked like somebody had
yeah.
piped the blood out of her. So yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't, you know, I think it is a. I mean, in terms of putting off the day in which it has to be acknowledged by our current ruling elite that maybe we're going to have to actually do something specific about this. I don't think the bombing campaign has done all that much really, because yeah, I mean it's been over and done in a week essentially. Um, Unless Israel starts a new bombing round of somewhere else. And they seem to be running out of targets at this stage. What's there left? There's the Houthis in Yemen, I guess. They could try a bit of a bombing run of them, see how that goes. Um,
I think Trump was
They
in.
have been bombing the Sorry.
Mm.
Yeah, they have been bombing the Houthis. They've even used their ships to shoot stuff at the Houthis, which is an interesting development. Although not their submarines yet, as the Americans were using theirs. Um, Netanyahu is running out of extra options, and they have still not actually occupied all of Gaza. There is still resistance there, and that is quite amazing
Mm.
in many ways, given the resources that Israel have put in and the amount of people that they have killed dead. Um, yeah,
which does very much again put the lie to this whole thing about regime change, which got a lot of the neoliberal press quite quite roused. They were quite happy with the idea of that. Oh, a bit of regime change. It's like 2003 again. Remember our heyday?
Yes,
Um,
let's turn it into a privatized country with child slaves. Yes. I mean, what's happening? What's
cracking
happening to
stuff.
Afghanistan? Nobody is looking at what's happened to Afghanistan, and
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, they should.
Yes, I mean it's been absolutely horrifying.
But yeah, as you say, here we go again. Um, Regime change. Mm.
But yeah, no, I thought it was fascinating watching them all immediately charging into line for it. Um, but yeah, but no, nobody. I don't. I don't think anyone seriously expected, least of all Netanyahu, seriously expected regime change to happen from bombing a bunch of stuff. It's like it would be a unique incident in history, near enough, that a bombing campaign from a foreign power would enable grassroots regime change like that. Like the more usual thing is that a bombing campaign from a foreign power enables the state to declare any dissent to be treachery and just mow down its own internal opposition,
Mm. Well, we'll
which I have no
find
doubt
out
has
soon.
been
We'll find that out for our own, for ourselves soon, I guess.
well, which leads us nicely onto another topic: the UK buying new nuclear bombers as part of its contribution to the decommissioning of nuclear weapons. Um, it just
Okie doke. The F-35A is what we're going to buy, apparently. They're quite cheap. The Americans flogging them for about $110 million a piece. Maintenance cost, I can't find any figures from later than 2018 when it was running at roughly $13 million a year to have one. I'm not sure exactly how many Starmer's planning, but um, these are to drop the B-61 gravity thermonuclear bomb, which people can look up on Wikipedia to save me giving you the full spiel about it. As you might guess from the name, it's a simple you have to drop it from the air, doesn't do anything spectacular. There are several countries who already have this bomb. Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, Turkey, as part of the NATO nuclear shared agreement, all of whom have about 20. And it was part of the Cold War scheme that the Americans would would have joint control of nuclear weapons with their lead countries so that the Soviet Union did not think that the Americans would not use nuclear weapons as they partially being in control of the countries that are actually close to the border as part of the nuclear standoff acceleration thing. Unless we are thinking that Putin is going to fight his way through Poland, through Germany, the Netherlands and Belgium, and probably France. France has their own airdropped nuclear missiles as well, but with a cruise missile version so that they can fire them from 600 kilometers away. The trouble with the B-61, which is my favorite because it was last produced in 1968, the same year as I was born, is it's completely old and primitive. And you have to have a fast plane to fly away because once you dropped it, it makes a big mess. So again, it's an example of a Labour politician being completely bamboozled. We already, you might have noticed, have bought the F-35 in the B version, which is the jump jet version, but the jump jet version isn't adapted to carry this bomb. So it means buying probably 30 odd of the A version, which is the standard fighter version, for roughly £3 billion, so that we can
Let me
drop
just check
something that
those
will
welfare
never,
cuts
ever
again. What were
need.
they? Oh,
The
3.9
last point
billion.
about the F-35 is unsurprisingly it's an American-led build, but 10% of production went to BAE, our old friend and useless arms company. So they are going to get a big cut slice of the money once again. So yeah, a classic military industrial carve up.
Mm.
Um, yeah, just an utter waste as we push towards that 5% of defence spending. Now, there's some arguments I've heard for higher defence spending because if they paid for a night shift to have a sentry wandering around the airbase where the refueling planes, the Voyager, were stopped, then Palestine Action wouldn't have been able to spray the engines full of paint, causing millions of pounds of damage. So for paying some squaddy a fiver for marching up and down, they could have spared us a lot of money. But
But
that's not the way of the
Andy,
spending.
by my calculations, you would have been able to pay that security guard £4 million because we're spending an extra 80 billion, and according to Starmer, that's an extra 20,000 jobs. So that's £4 million a job. So like there would be loads of security guards there. But anyway, the planes that Pal Action.
Wait, for 4 million quid, I'll stand out.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm prepared to do pretty much any number of weird shenanigans but yeah, but apparently the planes that Palestine Action decorated or revamped or whatever, they were leased anyway. We didn't own those. So maybe it is time we had our own planes that people can object to rather than just rented ones. But
Well,
yeah, I mean,
there's a very complex setup with the refueling tankers, of
uh-huh,
which we have 10.
uh-huh.
Two are now out of commission, but we have more than needed, and they're actually leased out to private companies occasionally to try to make money. So the you will really have to look at that one and have a long read on the idiocy. The other obvious point, and that I think we covered last week, but I'll do again, is that they can only refuel certain types of planes. They can't actually refuel the planes that Israel has, which is the Ministry of Defense now turning around. Oh, we weren't involved in war crimes because our planes aren't equipped to do that. So,
Good old
yeah,
incompetence.
I
God,
mean,
no.
Andy,
so,
who
yeah.
are these supposed to be used against? Russia, I presume, or Iran or China.
I'd love to to see us fighting to save Taiwan with the that really isn't a good plan.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I mean, to be honest, if Putin's tanks are in the Channel Tunnel and we drop a B-61 bomb in the tunnel, it will stop them getting through.
Oh God,
Uh,
thank
that's
goodness.
about the
It's
only
very, very
scenario I
reassuring.
can see.
But what about hold on, Andy, because it's great to have an expert here. Apparently, when we're being menaced, not only our skies and our water are being menaced, but we're being menaced with daily cyber attacks. Now, will a nuclear bomb be effective against daily cyber attacks? That's what I'd like to know.
Indeed, it will, because the electromagnetic pulse of a nuclear bomb will wipe
Ah,
every computer almost immediately in for quite a wide area
see,
around.
Michael Gove was unusually wrong. We need experts.
I feel like the side effect of vaporizing most of London might be a little on the high side. I don't.
But yeah, I mean, it frazzles computers out to a far wider range, phones, all manner of electronic devices because of
Hmm.
the electromagnetic pulse that goes out with it.
Well, the
But
other
yeah,
thing the Russians were being blamed for by Starmer was pushing up the cost of living, not Brexit or corporate theft or skullduggery or tax. It's Russia are pushing up our cost of living, right? So if we drop this bomb and it wiped out like phones life would be cheaper, wouldn't it?
yeah,
Less
there'd be less
electricity.
people on
Yeah,
welfare. There'd be less people just
yeah,
generally.
just yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, I can see that now. Thank you.
It's a drastic plan, but potentially an effective one. Um, cool. So, after having worked out exactly why it is we're spending vast sums of money on nuclear weapons to fight Russia. Um, we have a little one on Nigel Farage, who is set to let non-doms buy off their tax obligations with a one-off payment of £750,000, which for a man who, you know, makes his entire bread on outrageous levels of jingoism is quite a, you know. But then on the other hand, he is a millionaire city boy, so is
Does
is
he
ref
think his voters are planks? Does he think that this is what so infuriates me? Because reform voters are people, and their own leadership is so disgracefully, disgustingly assured that they're stupid. I would be very upset by this if I were a reform voter. But yeah.
I do wonder because you know, as with anyone who spends a little time on the internet or on social media, you come across the reform voters, and you throw out the lines and say, well, do you really trust a man who uh, one of his major jobs was flogging gold, and this is a guy who was a city trader before he became a politician, and factually he is probably one of the most dishonest politicians of all time in terms of the promises he's made versus what actually occurred. And the fact that when he worked for the EU, he was successfully prosecuted for robbing millions of pounds. Like, do you trust this man? And the answer always comes back as well, but what about Keir Starmer? It's just like,
You see, this is the great gift of the Labour Party, isn't it? Because nothing they say anymore, even if it is fundamentally decent, I mean, hard to find, but nobody wants to listen to them. Just nobody. And this is what they've done. This is what they've done
Yeah.
to the landscape. So, if you were a non-dom with billions of pounds, would you want to come and live in the UK? I mean, maybe actually. We're
I
not
mean,
currently on fire.
I mean, under Nigel Farage, I might.
Yeah.
Clearly, this is going to be a good place for me to live. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, obviously the argument that Farage, I suppose, puts forward to a degree on that kind of topic is very much that um, if you can draw millionaires and billionaires to Britain, then loads of money will come into Britain, and then Britain will become wealthier. Which I don't know. Like, I haven't really seen the. I think the evidence for this is considerably flimsier than the right-wing press likes to portray. So, for example, Italy have tried a very similar
Ah.
strategy, and what actually tends to happen is that very rich people come in, and yes, they spend money, but they spend money buying assets. So
Mm,
they buy land
mm,
primarily.
mm,
And what this actually does is drive the price of land up for
mm,
everyone else.
mm,
So the domestic rich pay more for less, and the middle classes pay more for less, and the working classes are priced out of housing altogether.
mm,
And you can see this in London, right? Like, London is a city that is plagued by over expensive housing
mm.
and has a huge number of billionaires. So what is happening here? So the billionaires are bringing in money, but also nobody can afford to live. So how is that? How is the one making up for the other under those circumstances?
Well, I guess as long as the people can stagger in and clean their floors, it's okay. Nobody really cares if they're going to live or not, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, that's the New York mayoral contest was very, very interesting for exactly that reason, and the powerful message that New Yorkers can no longer afford to live there, and combined with a very Corbynite approach, and he won. The guy won. So, but yeah. So I don't know. I keep seeing stuff that says the uh reforms lead is basically a shibboleth. It's not a thing. They've got 4% of councillors, or they still only have uh small percentage of county councillors. What do you think they're going to win, or based on this trajectory, or do you think it could all be all smoke and mirrors?
I'm very much that on this trajectory, there is a very serious danger. What I'm hoping for is that there is going to be a wake up, and people will think, I suppose, in the way that happened in France, is
Mm,
that when Le Pen actually got quite close to power, people panicked and said, God, we've got to stop this
mm,
by hook or by crook.
mm,
I don't think we're quite at that stage yet, but I think that unless there is a radical change, we can sleepwalk into getting Farage if the Tory party collapses or joins him,
mm,
and Labour tears itself to shreds in the meantime.
mm,
Because I think that there is a generally liberal majority as opposed to a right wing racist majority in the country as a whole. But if it's divided enough, then in under our system, Farage could be prime minister, and that scares the bejesus out of me.
mm. Especially as he'll have all those nice new nukes and prescriptions and yeah,
And
and
the
assisted dying. So,
burgeoning
mm,
surveillance state run by AI. Yeah, there's
mm,
a lot of very scary stuff. I mean, I think even if Reform don't win this time round, as long as they don't screw it up, there is a very good chance of them winning next time round. Um, because they've already essentially taken the mantle of the official opposition off the Tories, even though they only have a few
mm.
MPs.
It's
Um,
psyops. How did they manage to do that? It's,
I think perception is 99% of politics under these circumstances, right? The general public is no longer under the impression that the Tory first past the post position is unassailable, and therefore
mm,
it becomes, not inevitable, but inevitable in some cases, but certainly much more likely that they will fall apart because the perception is that they can.
mm,
And that means that Reform is by far the more vital organisation. I think Kemi Badenoch is a bad leader, but I don't think that many leaders in her position would be doing much better,
mm,
for the reason that the Tories are not perceived to be a winning party or a party that can win.
mm.
And that's going to do for them more than anything else. Like ultimately, I don't think the policy slate of the Tories matters at the moment,
No, right.
because nobody's paying attention to it. Nobody thinks that it's going to be that policy slate in power in a few years' time.
Mm,
Whereas reforms might be. Um,
mm.
on which note, we have now come up to an hour, and I don't want to be keeping everybody too long. The only other article which I had on the list was the assisted dying bill, which fortunately a very decent op-ed piece has been put together by Punk Academic, which I can simply recommend that everybody go and read. There you go. So I will say thank you very much to both Tabitha and Andy for a really good conversation. Really thoroughly enjoyed it this week. And to say goodbye to everybody, goodbye.